Comparing church insurance options shouldn't feel like learning a new language, but for most teams it does. So in this video, I'm going to give you a simple way to compare any two policies without turning yourself into a part-time insurance expert. Think about two boxes sitting on a table. They're the same size, same shape, even labeled the same thing, but one is filled with exactly what you need and the other is missing a few key pieces. From the outside, you never know. That's how most church insurance quotes work. They look identical until you open them up. So let's open the boxes and look at how to actually compare what's inside. First, we start with property coverage. And the reason we start here is simple. This is usually the biggest piece of the policy. In a lot of church programs, property can make up around 70% of the total premium. So if there's a mistake here, nothing else really makes up for it. Now, there are two things I want you to look at side by side. First is the building limit. You'll see a number on both quotes, and at first glance, they might even look similar. But the real question is, how did they get that number? Did someone just copy it over from the previous policy? Or was it built using a replacement cost estimate? Because copying limits is one of the fastest ways to end up underinsured. And I've seen cases where buildings are off by 20 to 30%. And that's not something you feel today. That's something you find out after a major loss. So don't just compare the number, compare how they got the number. Now, the second thing to look at is how the policy handles things like stained glass and pews. Some companies include those inside the building limit. Others separate them out. And that difference matters because these are often some of the most unique and expensive parts of a church building. So you want to be clear on how they're being treated before you move on, because once you understand what's actually being insured, now we can look at what it would cost you if something actually happens. Now, this next part is where a lot of policies win on paper and lose in real life: deductibles. This is where something can look like a great deal until you actually have a claim. So when you're comparing quotes, there are two deductibles you want to look at closely. The first is the all other perils deductible, and the second is the wind and hail deductible. Now, here's why this matters. I had a colleague review a church program where the alternative quote looked more expensive. And at first glance, it probably would have been dismissed. But when they dug into it, they realized the current policy had such large deductibles, the church would have had to pay $70,000 or more out of pocket before the insurance company paid anything. So what looked cheaper was actually far more expensive in a real-world situation. And this is the trap. We naturally compare premiums. But the better question is, if something happens, what do we pay first? Because that's the number. That's the real cost. So as you're comparing options, don't just ask which one is cheaper. Ask which one actually protects you when something goes wrong. Now let's talk about liability. And this is where churches are a little different from most organizations, because there are specific exposures that don't always show up the same way from one policy to the next. So instead of assuming everything is covered, this is where you want to slow down and confirm what's actually included. Here are the key areas I'd want to see clearly addressed in both options. General liability, that's your baseline. But when you get into areas like counseling coverage, directors and officers, sexual abuse coverage, religious freedom, and anything related to security teams. Now on paper, both quotes might say they include these, but the definitions, the limits, and how they actually apply can be very different. So this isn't just a checklist exercise. You're asking, does this actually match how our church operates day to day? Because if it doesn't, that's where gaps show up. Now a quick one, but an important one. If your church has vehicles or people driving on behalf of the church, you need to ask a simple question. Who is actually covered to drive? Is it just staff? Does it include volunteers? Is it anyone using a church vehicle with permission? This is one of those areas where it's easy to assume the answer and risky to be wrong. So make sure you're clear on who qualifies as a covered driver before you move on, because up to this point, you've compared the coverage itself. But there are two more pieces that most people skip, and they matter just as much. First, look at the insurance company behind the quote. How long have they been insuring churches? How many churches do they actually work with? Are they a leader in the space, or is this just one small segment for them? Because not every insurance company understands church risk the same way. And when something goes wrong, that experience matters. You don't just want a policy. You want a company that understands what you do. And finally, look at the broker, because this is not a one-time transaction. This is an ongoing relationship. So ask a few simple questions. What's their experience working with churches? Who is actually going to service your account? Is it a dedicated person who knows your situation, or a 1-800 number? And what does the renewal process look like next year? Because the real test of a broker isn't just how they quote your policy. It's what happens after you become a client. Now, at this point, you can absolutely take this framework and compare options on your own. You know what to look for, you know where the gaps usually are, and you know how to ask the right questions. But here's what most church teams run into. They go out and get quotes from multiple brokers, and now instead of clarity, they have more confusion. Different structures, different explanations, different assumptions, and without realizing it, they've made themselves the middleman, trying to piece everything together. And that's where this process starts to break down, because you're not just comparing coverage anymore. You're trying to interpret it, and that's a very different job. What we've found is that the churches who have the most confidence in their decision and the least amount of frustration in the process are the ones who work with a single trusted advisor, someone who understands church insurance, who can take your situation to the market the right way, bring back multiple options, and walk you through the differences clearly. So instead of you trying to become an insurance expert, you have someone who already is. And that's usually the difference between a process that feels overwhelming and one that feels simple. If you're wondering to yourself, now that you know what to look for in comparing programs, but you're wondering who you should use to help you buy insurance, I've made a video just for you. I'll explain who you should work with, and I'll see you there. It's called Church Insurance Broker versus Direct Carrier. Which is right for you? Thank you so much for watching. I'm Daryl Henry with Bitner Henry Insurance Group, an American church group of North Carolina and Minnesota. We serve those who serve others.